This happened in summer of 2020. I F0 at the time had gone on a trip to Moab, UT with my roommate and best friend. Since high school Kendall F1 at the time, we had last minute joined her family's trip. Celebrating her sister's high school graduation, we lived a few hours by car from Moab, which had just reopened. After being closed to the public due to COVID, they had plans to go skydiving and we were excited to tag along. Our plan was to drive separately, stay the night on the couch of her family's Airbnb, go skydiving with them, then stay the last night at a small cabin in a campground right outside town. Just the two of us as an added adventure. We had never been on a trip as adults staying on our own, and we're excited to have the independence. Fast forward, we had a great trip down there as well as a fun first night with Kendall's family. We all went skydiving in the morning early. It was beautiful. After Kendall, I had a huge adrenaline rush and decided to go for a hike to a watering hole. There we explored and even did a small cliff jump into the water. By the end of the day, we were exhausted physically from our activities and from the rush and now drop of adrenaline. We had checked into our campground, which was about 10 miles from the town. There was a general store at the mouth of the property, with somewhat unfriendly older cashiers to check us in, but we didn't think much of it. The campground was made of different sections for tents, RVs, and small cabins. When I say small cabins, I mean room for 2 twin beds and a chair and hardly anything else. We stayed in one of those. Like I said, Moab had just reopened to tourists, so besides us, we saw one other family of 3 staying in the entire campground. We also noticed we didn't have a cell phone signal in the camp. Remember that? By nightfall, we could hardly move our bodies. We were so sore and spent about an hour in camp chairs under the stars drinking a few Mike's Hards. Before I knew it, I realized we had had a little too much for being in an unfamiliar place on our own, but shook it off. We decided to call it a night and grabbed our lantern to head to the communal bathrooms to wash our faces. Also, I'll add now that Kendall had sprained her ankle a month prior to this and was wearing a boot on her right leg. Yes, she went skydiving and hiking with this. We were young and eager to get out after lockdown, but she was unable to drive with the angle our foot needed to be at to brake safely. So I had been doing all the driving. We made our way to the bathroom, giggling through the pitch dark with our light. We reached the hut that held the first separated bathrooms. Each had a shower directly across from the door, and a toilet and sink against on side wall. We swung the door on, eager to get out of the dark, and flipped the light switch on. I entered the room first and immediately stopped in my tracks. Kendall stopped in the doorway. We both were silent. There was something off. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like an intense feeling something was wrong. We stared forward at the shower, which had the curtain half drawn closed. There was some kind of short stepping stool in the middle of the shower with the front legs poking out from behind the curtain. My eyes started to rise and I could just make out the faint silhouette of a person standing on the stool behind the thin curtain. We stood there frozen in shock, confusion and disbelief. There couldn't be someone hiding behind the curtain like a scary movie. Suddenly Kendall broke the silence. "What's that?" I looked to my right where the sink was. Propped on the sink against the mirror was an iPhone with the screen facing us. The camera was out and recording. That snapped me out of my trace. I shouted, "Nope," and we both turned around and basically ran back to our cabin. Honestly, I know we didn't handle the situation well. Please don't get on me in the comments. If it had happened now, there's no way we wouldn't have reported it. But we were young and scared. We didn't know how to process what was happening. I still don't know really what happened. Anyways, we never stayed there again. Sorry it was so long. Kinda relived it while writing it. We locked the door and tried to figure out what we just did walked into. We couldn't call anyone calls. We had no signal, and this was our first time staying somewhere new on our own. I had been drinking and didn't feel confident that I could drive through the rocks and sharp turns and make it back to the highway. We tried to calm ourselves down, talk our way out of what we saw. We turned the lights off cause I couldn't get the image of someone looking through the small one window on the door leading into our cabin. We were all alone in this campground, completely exhausted physically from our skydive and hiking. I know it sounds dumb, but at the time we were so confused and tired. Just decided to go to sleep and leave first thing in the morning. We pushed our beds together and lay there in the dark in silence. I started to think about the staff who worked at the campground, and if they, knowing it was almost empty, had been the one in the bathroom, or if we were just mistaken in what we saw. About 10 minutes into laying there, Kendall said, "You know what's weird?" I frowned, waiting to hear something to add to this horrible situation. She told me about earlier when she had gone to take a shower, how she looked up and saw a blinking blue light in the vent above the shower. I didn't say anything. We left in the morning and never spoke about any of it again. I'll try and keep this short, so please forgive length, to protect the building itself, since it still exists and vacant. I won't share its name and I'll be vague on location, but the story is true. I've been an EMT going on 19 years. In those years, I worked for many a different ambulance agency. One agency I worked for was a hospital, Base 911, provided by Interfacility Ambulance Provider, because it was owned and run by a hospital company. Many of our stations were in the hospitals themselves. One of these hospitals was a small rural hospital in a very small town in NJ. Years ago, smaller hospital companies like the one I worked for were struggling financially, and larger corporations came in to buy out the smaller ones. When this company came in, it decided to close permanently this hospital. It was a gradual closure. First, they shut down medical floors and other services, but kept the ER open, but only during normal business hours. This too was shut down months later. Our station here was unaffected, and we had 24/7 access to this now empty of human hospital. While this wasn't a full-time station of mine, I did work out of there on a handful of occasions before they sold the building and moved the station elsewhere. Now imagine a hospital empty of anyone, except one small office for an EMS crew. Everything was still in the hospital's rooms and offices, just lacking us humans. It was creepy having this building, once full of life and energy, now silent and dormant. Anyways, I come in one morning, and the ambulance crew I would be relieving was out still. I get to the station around 5 a.m. for a 5 a.m. clock-in time. It was my first time at this station, and like many other humans, I was curious about what this empty hospital was like. So since I had time, I started walking around the old hallways, silent and just admiring what the building once was. I walk into the old chapel, ICU, and other areas briskly to not forget I'm actually there to work soon. The EMS office was just located off the main entrance and waiting room. I'm walking back to this EMS office to punch in. As I'm walking back, I start hearing whispering, clear as day whispering voices. At first I couldn't tell where they were coming from, until I started getting closer to the waiting room. They got louder but still whispers. I was thinking, okay, maybe the one security guard they had staffed was sitting in there on the phone being silent. As I walked into the dark waiting room, nothing, no one, and the voices stopped. Punch in, and not much of my time was spent there during the day. Days later I worked there again. This time I'm working with someone else who also never worked there before. Like me, she was just as curious about the building. I took her around the areas I knew and told her about what I witnessed only a few days earlier. We are once again walking back to our office near the waiting room. We are just talking when she interrupts me and asks me if I heard something. I didn't, but the silence revealed what she was hearing. Once again, we start hearing whispering voices, clear voices, but not hearing what is being said. As we tried to find the source this time, it was coming from an old office just outside the waiting room. As we walk in, nothing empty except for a desk. The voices stopped again. It was amazing that I had someone there to tell me I wasn't just hearing things and witnessed what I did. After that, I never had a chance to work out of there again. As the hospital building got sold and the station was relocated elsewhere, this building still exists to this day, vacant and waiting for redevelopment, I suppose. Last I drove by it untouched, surprisingly. This is the second story from abnormal or unusual happenings in my life. I like writing them down to share and remember them by. You can take the experience as you choose. This is just a true story from my view. To protect the location and identity, I will be vague. This is still an active church and congregation, so please don't go knocking on their doors asking to ghost hunt. I'm not necessarily a believer in ghosts, though you can call me skeptical. Once again, sorry for the long read. Several years ago, I was living on the outskirts of Greensboro, North Carolina. I was focused on college and was living with family. My family had a music director at a local Presbyterian church. On the side, this particular church had a theater program for young interested actors. They would put on small plays when school was not in session. Anyways, a lot of stuff around our house became props for the shows at this theater to save money. It was the week after Thanksgiving, and my family began to decorate our house for the holidays. I was home one night just relaxing. I was asked by my family to drive over to the church and pick up 2 outdoor decorative Christmas trees that we normally put outside our house. I didn't say no, of course, and made the drive out to the church. The building itself was relatively old. It had 3 attached sections: an administrative building where the pastor and church offices were located, the main chapel and classroom, theater building. Behind the church was a decent-sized graveyard. It was around 8 p.m. and the sun was already down, so it was dark outside at this point. I opened the door to the theater building, deactivated the security alarm to begin finding these trees. The theater in this particular building was upstairs, so I made the small climb up to the 2nd floor. At this point, I had already turned on all the lights To help ease my already present feeling of unease, I make it into the theater and begin to make my way towards the stage. I was told the trees were backstage, so I had a short walk to go. While I'm walking, I begin to hear shuffling backstage. Something was moving back there, but I couldn't see it since the curtains were closed. Could have it had been a mouse or something explainable. Possibly, but this moving sounded like stuff getting dragged. I paused to regain what composure I had, knowing I didn't want to go back to house empty-handed. I move quickly behind the curtains, find the trees and hightail it off the stage and to the back of the theater. I get the trees into the car and am getting ready to drive home. Then of course it struck me. I left the lights on, doors are locked, and security system off. I again mustered the courage to head back inside. To complete the locking of the building, I head back to the theater to turn off the lights up there. As I'm there, I begin to hear footsteps on the stage. The stage, mind you, is dark, but the seating area is lit. For giggles and just to see what happens at this point, I tap a shave and a haircut on the wall. I actually recorded it on my 2011 era Gen 1 Android phone. That footage sadly has been lost over the years. But anyways, I digress. No sooner had I finished than it sounded like a boom came from backstage. It sounded like one of the set pieces had fallen over. I dare not look or try to find the source. I turn off the lights, go back downstairs. At this point, I'm holding my bladder as well, so in classic horror movie fashion, I decide the best thing to do is relieve myself first instead of leave the building. No lie, as I'm there peeing, I start hearing the floors creaking above me, as if something was heading towards the stairs to come down. At this point, I must have a heart rate around 150 and am ready to just make my escape. But I was in that fight or flight scenario. No sooner had I finished washing my hands, I noticed the sound stopped above. I activate the security system, turn off the lights and head out. To this day, I have never returned to that church. Not because I didn't want to, but I moved shortly after. As much as I would love to figure out what happened that night, it was by far one of the most intense and terrifying nights of my life.